Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
Allison Davies is a multi-award-winning registered music therapist using music to support brain function and reduce anxiety. Allison teaches how you can be your child's own therapist by ditching behavior management and switching to brain care. Allison is one of Australia's leading parenting and child behavioral experts. Allison works with schools and parenting groups worldwide to help deliver light bulb moments about how your children's brains work and how we can support their brain development to help them and us thrive. Her extensive training, experience, and incredibly engaging and entertaining style of delivery connect with her audience and create raving fans whose lives are forever transformed for the better. Allison received a Bachelor of Music and Bachelor of Teaching from the University of New England and a Master of Music Therapy from the University of Queensland before training with the Academy of Neurologic Music Therapy in 2016. She is registered with the Australian Music Therapy Association and has been in private practice in Tasmania, Australia since 2007, working predominantly across the areas of early childhood intervention, mental health, neural rehabilitation, and aged care. Welcome, Allison. Thank you for joining us here today.
That's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a delight. I have been following your work for a little bit, and I'm excited to talk to you about brain care. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this? What motivated you to get into this work?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been a registered music therapist for many years in Australia. And I've worked under a very sort of, I guess, as we all did throughout the 90s and beyond, until recently, I guess I really worked in a model that was focused on behavioral outcome and goals that I started to feel, is this the best way I can work? Is this the best way I can offer my service, I guess, as a music therapist? And I started to really just become less and less fulfilled with the model of which I was working in. This happened slowly over time. I didn't really recognize it until I had a light bulb moment in 2016, where all of a sudden I started to really learn about the brain. I trained in 2016. I trained with the Academy of Neurologic Music Therapy, and all of a sudden it just hit me so hard that all of the behavioral outcomes that we'd always been working towards were always a byproduct of what was going on inside the brain or the body, the nervous system. And that by constantly focusing on behaviors, we were exacerbating this paradigm that no longer made sense, because the more I was sort of, looking at the research and the science, we've learned a lot about the brain over the last 10 years. And so as I was sort of getting up to date with what the research was telling us and our understanding, even really, there's a lot of information really on specifically on music and how the brain responds to music. And the more I sort of read it all, the more it just became clearer and clearer that I needed to change the way I was working. And I really needed to focus on the brain. And I went through a few different stages of how I wanted to do that. First, I started working purely with autistic children. And then I realized that there were a lot of people in the world experiencing anxiety and executive functioning difficulties and sensory difficulties, whether they were neurodivergent or not. I really wanted to expand my work and be able to provide information to so many people. So I completely stopped my clinic at this point and started creating resources. I created a workshop, and luckily enough, I got a grant that allowed me to run this workshop around Australia in regional centres. And it went from there. It just became so my 2-day workshop, which was called Brains Equal Behaviors, became really popular. And I had not realized how many people were looking for this information. I didn't even realize until I actually started doing the workshop that also another sort of byproduct of this allied health model, I guess, that I was working in Australia, where you go and see your client, your client comes and sees a therapist once a week or once a fortnight. It felt, I did not realize how disempowered so many of the parents were. And I started to realize, for example, when we go with our health and we, for example, a doctor, so we know the basics about healthy eating and exercising, and we have our vitamins and minerals and our green smoothies, and we know about the importance of sleep and exercise. And we sort of do that as best we can. And then when there's something acutely wrong, we go to the doctor. But in the allied health world, everyone was going to see their therapist once a week or once a fortnight, as much as they could get in, really, because there's long wait lists. And it became a very separate type of health and well-being, one in which parents were really not being given the information. And that's no fault of the therapist. Is this model that we're entrenched in.
Right, it's a system thing.
Yeah. So there's no space or time to be able to educate parents in between sessions or during sessions. So I just realized, like, with a lot of clarity, that this is how it all looked from a bird's eye view looking in, when I sort of, assessed everything. And I realized how many parents and caregivers were feeling really disempowered by not having the information. And around about this time, my daughter was diagnosed with autism. And so I was acutely experiencing this in my own world as we went off to see different service providers. And I was like, hang on, someone tell me what's going on. I'm a proactive parent, and I want to be the change maker at home and in our lives. And so I really realized there was a gap. I started creating resources, workshops, and it very quickly snowballed. And I started being asked to do big workshops, big conferences with hundreds and thousands of people and lots of keynote speaking. And so within Australia, I've been able to really, I hope I have, it's my aim, my goal, to be able to sort of create a platform where as many people who are looking for the information around their brain or their child's brain and how to support their child's brain to function at its best is being offered, without it needing to go to Ali as a therapist to see her once a week for half an hour. And that's where I'm at right now. Yeah.
So one of the things that a lot of people are doing to try and get their work out there is online groups or seminars. Are you doing any online coaching that you allow groups in to hear what you have to offer?
I am no longer doing one-on-one consulting, but I a few years ago, I also live in a very regional part of Tasmania. I live in the rainforest. So where I am, I realized that if I wanted to continue to work, I needed to expand. I needed to go online because there's not many people where I live. And so I started just with a Facebook page, as we all do. Many years ago, I didn't really know what I was doing. I just started a blog, and I just started writing about things that I was thinking about. And it moved from there. And now I have a large Facebook page where I share a lot of content. I really, really aim to share as much content as I can for free so that people can just find it and access it. Part of my content is me telling my own story, because I do believe that storytelling is one of the best ways to educate people, if it isn't through song. I think I'm a bard by nature. I wish I could set some time aside to put all of the information to music and sing it to people so they'd really remember it. But right now it's storytelling. And so I share a lot of my own story. I like to write. It's a really beautiful creative outlet for me. And then I offer that as my work as well. So I sort of have this mixture of, I'm using the research and the science and what we know of about the brain and music, and I'm mixing that with my own lived experience as an autistic person. I should have mentioned that I'm an autistic person, and so is my daughter. And so I blend that, and also all of my experience as a therapist, sort of mix all of those hats together and share content around that. But I do have 2 online resources that one of them is my 10-week Brains Equal Behaviours e-course. So that workshop I spoke about at the beginning, where I started, that became an e-course, and that's been wildly successful. And thousands of people have been part of that, and the community there continues to grow.
But that one is titled Brains Equals Behavior.
Yes, that is. The focus of Brains Equal Behaviors is understanding what is going on in our children's brains, and really in a way that really allows us to have a complete and instant paradigm shift of understanding that the behaviors are not the problem. The behaviors are always a byproduct of what is going on in the brain. And it doesn't mean that what's going on in the brain is a problem either. It just usually means that there's some dysregulation, trauma, anxiety, survival mode, patterns, unconscious belief systems. And so the focus of Brains Equal Behaviors is that we focus on brain care, not behavior management. So most of the people accessing that work are parents, carers, and teachers who have children who are, really having a hard time, and that's being expressed behaviorally. So self-harm, lots of meltdowns, aggression, violence, hyperactivity. Sometimes it's just the fact that my child just cannot focus. And so there's a lot of neurodivergent families in there as well, a lot of families and carers of people with ADHD and who are autistic, OCD, Tourette syndrome. It's not just for neurodivergent families, it's open to anyone. And there's also a lot of people in the Brains Equal Behaviors course who are just really interested in understanding more about their children's brains and how to support them. So the information around brain care and what's going on in the brain and how the brain relates to aggression, anxiety, hyperactivity, meltdown, sensory overload, all of that, executive dysfunctioning, that's the key part of what we offer in that course. But then there's a lot of looking at, these are the strategies for how we can support this through music. Mainly we're talking about music-based strategies.
Okay, so do you have a story or two that you can share with us, a success story, as it were?
I could tell you one of my own success stories.
All right.
I was diagnosed with autism in 2016 when my daughter was. So I started going through all of her assessments, and I was like, oh, this sounds familiar. And I was looking at all of the little criteria and all the lists, and I was thinking, I just thought everyone did this. And I realized that even as a therapist who thought I knew autism and had been working with autistic people for years and thought I should know more, I realized that I had not been able to have a perspective into my own needs and my own life and my own scaffolding and coping strategies throughout my life. I'd always known that it was very difficult to make eye contact, and it's something that I really taught myself to do, which isn't something I would ever recommend, but it's something that I did myself. No one actually tried to train me to make eye contact, but it's something as a child that I felt motivated to do because the other girls that I was sort of watching and learning about what they did. So I spent my early childhood really like, I felt like I was trapped inside my head and my eyes were windows, and I was just looking out at, I'd chosen the people I wanted to be like, and I was studying their every single move, and I was just working out how to be in the world by observing and mimicking, which is a very common autistic trait for women especially. And one of those things was not having external behaviors. So there was no rocking, there was no running away, there was no outward outbursts, even though I felt them inside my body. And I constantly had to, do things like this with my hands, which I'm just clenching my muscles for those of you who can't see me, or clenching squeezing my muscles in my feet or my legs to stop my hands from flapping. No one asked me to do any of this. It's just things that I was doing because the other girls I was watching weren't doing them either. And so I realized I had a whole life of suppressed needs, and I recognized that I had oh gosh, there's a whole list of things I could reel off. Anyway, I had been supporting my needs as an autistic person through playing music, which I guess if we'd known I was autistic as a child, we would have called it my special interest, because I did it for hours and hours every day. But it's such a common, it's one of those interests that if someone is spending hours on music every day, everyone just loves it and accepts it. If I was lining up toys for hours every day, everyone would have tried to change it. So again, no one really recognized this, but all of these hours of music every day were really, really doing wonders for my nervous system, for my breathing, because I played the saxophone, for repetition and the melody and all of the things that I know that, which we will get into, that music does to support the brain. So it was wonderful. It was keeping me regulated. Then when I had children, I stopped playing music, partly because I was very sick when I was pregnant and I just couldn't do anything. And then my daughter was really unsettled. And so that was the end of me spending hours a day, or even any time a day, of doing music. And all of a sudden I became almost completely non-functioning. So I could not talk. It was non-verbal. I was, couldn't make a cup of tea, couldn't remember how to drive, which way, I'd get to an intersection and not be able to work out which way I had to go to get somewhere in my own hometown. This didn't happen overnight. This happened slowly. And of course, it was assumed that it was postnatal depression, but I very, very, very vividly remember that I absolutely had no experience or feelings of depression. And there was nothing in my own mind that felt depressed. I just couldn't do the things that I used to be able to do. Anyway, this led to my autism diagnosis. That was just one part of it. But I started having meltdowns at this time, lots of meltdowns. I was having maybe 3 a week. About 2 years ago was when I really started looking at the concept of brain care. And I wanted to do that for my work, but I also wanted to do it for myself. I was Googling brain care, looking up everything brain care, and this word wasn't being used. And I thought, we have so many different types of care. Like, surely someone's talking about brain care. I just wanted general, healthy, daily, good living practices for my brain. And I couldn't really find anything.
Better make them up.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I did. So I really started looking through the research, the science, the books, what other people were doing, what my own experience was, and what I know about music and how we can use music to support the brain. And I came up with the 12 pillars of brain care. Now, we'll talk about these soon, I imagine, but just to finish the story, when I started really supporting my brain, caring for my brain in very, very tiny ways, but just as part of my daily lifestyle, slowly but surely, my meltdowns became less. And it's probably taken close to 4 years maybe of this dedication to supporting myself, supporting my brain. But I didn't have a single meltdown in 2019, and it's now 2020. So that's been over a year.
Great.
Yeah. And, like I tell everybody, it's not like you work on yourself and then you're done. It's a constant daily lifestyle choice, as you know, but one that I've found really, really beneficial. And I'm not trying to change my neurotype, and I'm absolutely a very autistic, happy person, as in I really accept it and embrace it, and I own that. But I also do want to live the best life that I can, and that's what's happening for me right now.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, the idea that I take what I have and use it to the best of my abilities is, I think it's optimal for everybody. And
Yeah.
some people are just fabulous in organizing, and they want every place for everything in its place. And other people are just, if they had to live that way, they'd be suicidal.
Mm,
So, it doesn't make one right or the other wrong, but
exactly.
if you have somebody, if you've worked with people on the spectrum that they're calling autism, um, if you've worked in it long enough, these are just really delightful people. This is a full range of people with interests and abilities and sensitivities, and some of them know how to do self-care and some don't. And that's one of the things I love about the work that I found that you're doing, is that you've got, things like the 12 pillars of self-care, brain care,
Mm.
and it's helping people. And maybe they won't really gravitate to the ones you did, but in reading the ones you've got set up, they might get sparked to find something that works better for them.
Yes, and that's the aim. So it's never like, this is how you do it, guys. This is right. I'm right. Just follow me. I'm just creating a resources and a platform with information that people can pick and choose from. And all of the things, all of the different pillars of brain care, they're all beneficial. And even if someone went, oh, I need a bit of that one in my life, and that was it, then that's going to be a good, healthy thing. And the aim is always, always, always just to give ourselves the opportunity to function at our best. So it's never to try and change anyone or to try and make them better or function differently or achieve more goals. And I'm someone who, my own executive functioning is shocking. I'm my husband is basically my carer in so many ways, and that's okay. And I'm quite fulfilled right now, and he's fulfilled. And it's not that I'm trying to make myself be able to do things that are difficult for me. I'm really just recognizing my support needs and supporting them. And I think that's something that needs to change in the narrative as well. I mean, you just touched on it then. Um, our our capabilities or abilities in terms of what people can see externally don't define our worth or our value. And so I think it's a much more important focus to focus on supporting ourselves to be our best rather than trying to improve ourselves.
Well, you've listed these 12. The first one is emotional release.
Yes.
And what's the one or two sentence summary of how you feel that emotional release is a pillar of brain care?
Right. Emotion is, so firstly, the definition of brain care is giving our brain more of what helps it run and less of what shuts it down. So our brain needs more emotional release. Emotion, my two sentences here, emotion is quite literally energy in motion. It needs to move. And in our Western world, right now, at least in the Western world, not so much in the olden days, but we keep it inside. We keep it pent up and pent up and pent up, and it's locked in. And that's when our brain just can't cope anymore. We cannot regulate if we are pent up with emotions. So we need more opportunity for emotional release in our daily living, in our day-to-day lifestyle.
And so are you, in part of your work, are you coaching people in how to release emotionally in more constructive ways?
Yes. So I also have a membership, an online membership called the Brain Care Cafe. And in the Brain Care Cafe, we focus on a pillar of brain care. Luckily, there's 12. We focus on one pillar of brain care each month. And every weekend, I deliver the community a new brain care strategy. Each of these strategies are specific little ways that we can incorporate emotional release, or whatever the pillar is, into our daily lifestyle. And then, of course, there's a big library full of strategies there because we've been going for a long time. And people might go, I don't know if I like this one. And then they might find something else that's just really beneficial. But they're all very, very simple. For example, emotional release, the brain, melody. If we had to pinpoint how the brain responds to music in a real nutshell, we would say melody goes with emotion and rhythm goes with movement. So when we experience melody, when we listen to something melodic, even if we sing a really simple melodic tune, or hum, or even think about a really simple melodic tune, that activates our limbic system, which is the part of the brain in charge of emotions, in a way that allows us to feel the emotion. It doesn't lead to a threat response. It doesn't make us feel anxious. It doesn't add to the hyper arousal of the limbic system that puts us into survival mode. It just, basically, the way I think of it is it sort of just takes the top off the limbic system and allows some steam out. So this is why we cry when we watch Disney princess movies or musical theatre or soundtracks. The music is always very melodic, and that allows us to release. So it can be as simple as listening to just a tune that's not a rap or a hip hop, but a melodic type of piece of music. Just experiencing something like that allows our limbic system to release some emotion. It's as simple as that. So that is a strategy, but there's many.
So the next pillar is predictability.
Yes.
And you say here, it's something that gives our brain something to focus on as a reference point.
Yeah. It is good for us to be in unpredictable situations as well. But if we are anxious, if we are, needing some support, creating an environment or having predictability in our environment is really, really helpful, because when our brain knows what is going on, what is coming up next, and then that thing that it predicted happened, the brain goes, oh, I know what's going on here. I'm in control right now. And a brain that feels in control is not a brain in survival mode. So it can be as simple as the song Every Little Cell, or any song that we sing over and over and over and over and over. Singing a song over and over and over, like chanting, creates repetition. It might be drumming. It might be listening to African drumming. Or it might be hip hop. Just listening to it. Anything that creates an auditory input of repetition in our environment is then integrated by our brain, and the brain hears it, acknowledges it, predicts what's coming next, and then enjoys the fact that it is so predictable, and what's coming next is exactly what came before, and then that thing's coming again. All of a sudden, the brain knows exactly what is going on in this environment. Even if there is a lot of stuff in the environment that still doesn't make sense, even at this time in our lives right now where there's a lot of uncertainty, during the COVID-19 lockdown, there's a lot of uncertainty. However, we can create a sense of predictability within our environment that offers our brain something to cling on to feel safe.
And then, as you mentioned, that if you bring it out of that fight or flight response, now you've got a whole different mode of operating that's more flexible.
Absolutely.
When you're in fight or flight response, you don't have as many options. You're not as flexible. Yes. So then the third pillar is sensory breaks. What do you want to share with us briefly about sensory breaks?
Sensory breaks are so important. I mean, I kind of say it about all of them. I always go, oh, this is the most important, but they all are. They're all equal. I believe that. So throughout the whole of human history, no brain has ever had to deal with the sheer volume of sensory information that we have in our environments now. This is paramount. When we understand this, it should shape the whole narrative around anxiety, especially childhood anxiety. No brain, no people, no humans in the whole of human history have ever had to deal with the sheer volume of sensory information that we currently have in our environments. Our brains have literally not evolved to the point they would need to be able to cope with the amount of stuff we have in our environments. It's only since the Industrial Revolution that we've even had lights, and batteries and cars, and then all of a sudden, you know, that's not very long. A couple of 100 years, we've gone from having nothing but the natural environment to everything, global brand conglomerates and consumerist lives where everything's filled, and there's moving things and flashing things, and there's screens, and none of this is inherently a problem in itself, but the environment that we currently live in is not an environment that our brain was ever designed to cope with.
So how do you take sensory breaks?
Well, we need to look at the environments we do have control of. We don't have control of all the environments we spend our time in, but we do have some. Our houses, our cars, our bedroom, our classroom if we're a teacher maybe. And we need to look at those rooms from a sensory perspective. What can I see in here? What can I hear? What can I feel? Go through the senses and then go, right, what can I remove, or what can I pull back from what we can hear? So it might be turning off the keypads, or turning off the toys that make noises, or turning off the ringtones. What can I see? How can I reduce what we can see? And it's not about becoming a minimalist either. It's about looking around and becoming aware, spending time in your environment and becoming aware of what in here that I can see makes me feel ugh. And at first this can be really difficult because we don't know what that feeling is, because we always feel because we're also sensory overloaded.
Right.
But, you know, there's small places to start. I started with the clothes I wear. I looked at them from my daughter's perspective. She had said she had a very, very firm rule on what sort of patterns and what colours she could wear, and explained to me why. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. I'm going to go to my wardrobe and look at my clothes. And I realised that the really patterned things, even though they were beautiful, they were hanging up and I wasn't wearing them because I realised they made me feel a bit ugh. And that was where I started really looking at everything individually. How does this make me feel and why, from a sensory perspective? It sounds like an enormous task, but every single tiny piece of sensory information that we remove from our environment makes a difference. So starting off small, it might be putting a blindfold over your eyes for 15 minutes or closing your eyes for 15 minutes. That is a sensory break. That is 15 minutes that you are not bringing gazillions of pieces of sensory information to your brain. It might be wearing noise cancelling headphones, or even popping headphones on to listen to a podcast. You are blocking out billions. I don't know how many. There's no research on that, but you are blocking out so much sensory information, which means it is not coming to your brain. Every single piece of sensory information, or any information that comes to our brain, needs to be actioned, like integrated, made sense of, and actioned. And that's just a lot of work. And our brain uses up so much energy on a daily basis. So any kind of break we can give our brain is going to help it and help us.
I love the idea that you say, you know, even moments when you're consciously taking moments of less noise or less visual clutter. So
Yeah.
let's move along so we can get into the full 12. We've got number 4 is use your voice. This is not so literally obvious on the surface. How is this a pillar of brain care?
Our voices have become quite suppressed. The way we use our voice now, especially as adults, is very well thought out, sensible. We like to have conversations that make sense. We talk about our emotions. There are certain things we don't feel like we can talk about. We use our voices very sensibly. So our voices have become quite suppressed, and we ideally would be using our voice to wail and to cry and to make noise and to groan and to say the things that we really need to say that are really important to us, to stand up for ourselves and to stand up for our children and our loved ones. But to be able to get to that point, we need to practice using our voice. We're so so many people have become conditioned to be really nervous about using their voice when they're feeling shaky. And so we practice using our voice through singing and toning and humming and whistling, and all of that stuff is helping us become more confident with using our voice in a bigger way, which leads to a point where we can really use our voice to express our emotion, really use our voice to release our anger if we've got anger pent up inside us, really use our voice to speak our boundaries and to stand up and advocate for ourselves and our needs. It starts from a very small place of just practicing using our voice out of the ordinary way of talking.
Well, I like the idea that you say here at one paragraph in that pillar, use our voices to align with our truth. And in order to do that, we have to slow down enough to get clear about what is our truth, right? Because so much in this Western world, as you talk about, is about suppressing the everything that doesn't fit into a nice little logical box. And the emotions don't like to fit in that box, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think if we used our voices more in alignment with the way our children use their voices, we'd be a lot healthier. Crying whenever we need to, crying out loud, saying whatever we think when we think it. Well, there's boundaries there. But, raising our voice when we need to, rather than just keeping it pent up. Obviously, this stuff, when we actually do this work, there's boundaries around this. It needs to be safe. It needs to be respectful, and all of that. So I'm not saying we should just all yell at people, but children use their voice very authentically.
Right, but just as much as the idea of giving myself permission to cry, it is, when I think to all the times I've worked with people and they've started to cry, and I've encouraged them to stay with that thought and keep breathing, and they have interpreted that as me saying stop crying. So it's an old tape playing in them, that no matter even the fact that I'm saying, okay, just feel that and tell me the thoughts that are with that, keep breathing, you can cry if you need to, but keep your breath moving, and they're hearing me say stop crying.
Yeah.
When there was nothing in my words about stopping crying. It just leads me to understand how deeply we are conditioned to not want to cry, to not let ourselves cry, to think it's bad or wrong or weak to cry.
Yeah.
And crying is one of those ways to use your voice.
Yes. We wipe our tears away before they even drop off our chin. They're gone. And we even cry quietly. I've had a profound experience this week. One of my best friends died on the weekend. We're in isolation right now. And so I've been grieving in isolation, and I found it a very powerful opportunity to wail and really cry in ways that I don't think I would have if I was around my friends and loved ones right now, even though I might have felt like doing it. I think I would have fallen in sync with how we were all sort of being together and grieving together, which is also okay. But I've really very much so, this just in the last few days, really had this experience of using my voice in grief. And I felt like I can, because I live in the forest and I'm in isolation. I felt very safe to do it. And it has profoundly helped me over the last few days. And I think that crying, I also have a daily tear practice myself. So I listen to a song, or I listen to music each day, just a little snippet of music that I know makes me tearful. And I allow myself to have that cry every day. And that's part of my brain care. And this is not what everyone has to do, but it's something that works for me. There's no way I'm ever going to turn on the news or to induce crying or do anything that's detrimental. I don't want to have any baggage attached to this cry. I just want my limbic system to just be activated a little bit, enough for me to have some tears and move some emotion out so that I can just carry on. And that involves using our voice. We have been being conditioned to have this silent cry.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss. You know, as you say that, I remember that you sent me some email and said something about that you lost someone. So I apologize for the insensitivity there of saying, "Wow, let's just do this interview anyway." But you're doing
Oh,
great,
not at
so
all. It's
thank you,
fine.
thank you
Thank you.
for that. Um, the fifth pillar is to pull back from information. This is one I've been banging the drum on for decades with people. What do you say about pulling back from information?
We do not need to know all of the things that we think we need to know. Do you remember when a question, you know, back in the 80s maybe, a question had come up and you go, oh, do you remember such and such? And you'd sit around the dinner table and you talk about it. You might not ever come to the answer, and that would be okay. Now we're straight to Siri, we're straight to Google, and we want the answer. Like, oh, who was that actor that played that such and such in that movie? Boom, go to Google. This information is doing us damage. In itself, this information is not bad or a problem, but because of the volume of information that we have access to, and so we're just constantly seeking it, we are causing so much extra work for our brain, because our brain tends to work a bit like a filing cabinet with information. It wants to make sense of it, analyze it, evaluate what it means, put it in context, and then ideally store it somewhere. And our brain throughout the whole of human history has not been doing that with information. Information is not something that our brain has ever had a lot of until the last, again, couple of 100 years, especially in the last 10, 20 years since the internet, or since we had phones with internet. So we've always got it on us. So with every single year, we are bringing greater access to information to our brain. And we're just clogging it up with mindless jobs that just use up our energy, that are not important to our life. They are not doing us any good. Now, it's important to say that it's also a blessing to have a lot of information around, and here we are sharing information with people. I think it's about really recognizing what information feels like mindless fluff and just clogs at us up and just isn't relevant, and what information sparks something in us and goes, oh my gosh, this is going to help me. So recognizing the difference between those and trying to cut back from the stuff that's just random stuff we do not need. And there is a lot of that in our lives. We do a lot of Googling, and we go and look up people on Instagram and check out them, what their wives look like and what they're wearing and who said what and what's going on in the royals. And this stuff is not important.
And, you know, I tell people, if it's one of your little special interests and you have fun with it, great. But for so much of what we find in the news and what we want to get into arguments with people over, that we, as you're saying, that we have to Google the answer, so much of it is non-useful and stress-inducing.
Yes.
And when I induce stress about things that I don't have any control over, I'm doing the opposite of brain care. I'm doing brain abuse at that point. So
yes. And
so
there's the added thing there that leads to, we believe what we think we know, and we don't need to believe any of the things that we think we know or the things that we're reading about. Most of it is never ever going to impact us directly in our life. It's not our reality, even if the information says it's there. We don't need to be believing that stuff, because when we start to take on external information and believe it to be true, it changes the way we see ourselves in the world, and that's really problematic.
well, and one of the things that I have told people is there's a reason you can only see from such a distance and hear from such a distance, and that is because you only have limited capacity for affecting change or helping. And I tell people, turn off the news. If you must, watch a little cycle in the morning and maybe one at night, but better to go days without it. If it's really important for you to know, someone will tell you. And if you knew everything that was going on in the town where you lived, all the good, all the bad, all the horrible, all the wonderful, you would be living in great joy and aliveness. Because if you found out that down the road the neighbor's house burned down, you could get in your car and go down and help them and take them a meal and take them some food and offer to watch the kids. And you can contribute to the solution to the things that are difficult to deal with. But when you're watching the news, what you're getting is the worst of the worst stuff from around the globe that you can't do anything about. And then you load up with that, and then you have the usual, the vagus nerve response and the mirror neurons are going, and you're thinking, oh my God, that's horrible that this happened, and you can't do anything about it. So we overload ourselves with things we have no control over, and then we build the stress, which builds the overwhelm, which builds the fatigue, which builds, it's a vicious cycle.
Yes.
Well, so I realize, we've gone, quite a ways here, and we're only on number 6. Let me just ask, is it more important for us to have you take the conversation in a different direction and just let people know how they can get access to your 12 pillars and download the PDF like I did, or do you want us to keep
Probably,
going?
yeah. I think that's probably a good idea, because I'd really like to talk a bit about music and about how music is impacting our brain, if that's something you'd like me to talk about.
Absolutely. That's what got me hooked on you.
Yeah. And then I guess, I find it so hard to get through the 12 pillars in a simple sentence. Actually, I need to probably come up with a simple sentence for each of them, because every interview, when anyone asks me about them, takes ages. So yeah, I think that's good, just directing people towards the ebook. And
All right, and they can find that where?
I'll give you the link. I'll just write down to send you the link, because I'm not exactly sure what it is.
All right, very good. And so, how do you want to transition into music?
I'm pretty sure that they can find it. If they just go to my website, there will be a button there that says download the book.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Well, we'll make sure we have we'll have that in the description for the podcast. So music.
Yes, music. So I think it's really important we have an idea of what we think music is, but it's been greatly conditioned into us. Let's go back 400 years. Before then, everyone was making music together. There was no such thing as someone not being musical. The idea did not exist. Every community and every culture in the entire world was making music together and sharing in music and using music as a very important part of their their culture. And then all of a sudden in the Western world, I don't know why this happened, someone changed it. And then the rich, privileged people became the musicians, or the educated people became musicians, and everyone else became listeners or spectators. And it started a real us and them. It really created a divide. All of a sudden music took on a whole new meaning. It became about performance and affluence and accessibility, which is a very, very sad thing. And I'm not saying there's a lot of beautiful, wonderful things to have come out of the Western world of music. So I'm not, that's all wonderful. But it did lead to a divide in who was musical and who wasn't, or who was allowed to be musical and who wasn't allowed. And we still carry that now, because we believe that if we have not had lessons and can't play an instrument, or that if we can't sing in tune, we are not musical. And we hear it all the time. Oh, that person's musical, but I'm not, or I'm not, it's so sad. And it's just we have been conditioned to think this way because of our history of music over the last few hundred years in the Western world. And it is just absolutely not true. To be human is to be musical. Our brain is a musical organ. When I trained with the Academy of Neurologic Music Therapy, the first thing that I learned was that music is our it's our mother tongue. Music is our mother tongue. And I think of music to the brain as the way I think of breath to the lungs. There's no separation of music and how the brain functions. When we experience music, and experiencing music means thinking it, making it, or listening to it. When we experience music, more of the brain becomes active simultaneously than when we experience any other thing that has been researched yet. So when we experience music, even just by thinking about it in our head, even if we get a little jingle from an ad on TV caught in our head and we're singing it over and over, that activates our brain in a way that allows for so much more to happen inside the brain more easily. Both hemispheres are talking to each other. Neural pathways are crossing the midlines. Our prefrontal cortex, which is this part of the brain just behind our eyebrows, it is switched on and accessible, because often whenever we start to feel on edge, when we get a little bit concerned, when we're in survival mode or we're experiencing any kind of anxiety, our prefrontal cortex becomes the first part of our brain to kind of become non-accessible, or just sort of switches off, I guess you could think of it like that. And our prefrontal cortex is where all of our executive functions are. So when we are dysregulated, or when we are in a heightened state of arousal, or we're anxious, it becomes impossible to do our executive functions. It becomes impossible to inhibit our behaviors, to analyze, evaluate, make good decisions, and so much more. Transition between different environments and think flexibly and change our minds and be able to cope with all of those things that we do on a daily basis without even realizing. So when we experience music, our prefrontal cortex lights up like a Christmas tree. So we are musical beings. To be human is to be musical. It's got nothing to do with whether you've had a music lesson or whether your parents could, teach you the piano or anything like that. That's got absolutely nothing to do with being musical. And it's very important that we reclaim our musicality, because our brain is a musical organ. And while we are suppressing it or believing that we are not musical, we are really holding back one of the key parts of the things that make us who we are. So I feel very, very passionately about reintroducing the idea of music into people's lives as something that is a basic form of expression of who we are as our mother tongue, and creating safe spaces and platforms for people to learn about how to express their musicality. And I also think it's really important to know that I think of music as an umbrella term. So music is traditionally what we think of as the performance or the thing we're listening to on the radio. But I think of music as an umbrella term. It's a sum of all its parts. And there are so many tiny, tiny little things that come together to make up what we think of as music. And they are rhythm, melody, harmony, tempo, so speed, dynamic, volume, silence. Even silence. It is impossible to have rhythm without silence.
Yep.
And no one thinks of silence as part of music. Our narrative around music is so based on what's happened over the last few hundred years in the Western culture, and it's not based on the actuality of what music is. The physicality of music, physical movement, is an aspect of music. Frequency, vibration, and overtone, and there are so many more. There are so many tiny, tiny things that come together to create this big ball of what we call music. And our brain responds to all of those little elements in slightly different ways. And that's why when we experience music, we have such a huge response in our brain. So I like to focus on the elements of music and implementing and understanding how we can use those and implementing those into our daily lives. So when I am giving brain care strategies that are music-based, they're never going to be about, they're unlikely to be about a big musical performance or anything that needs an instrument or anything that we traditionally think of as music. It's more likely to be implementing some kind of repetition or implementing some sense of melody or tempo within our lives. And when we start to think of music as a sum of its parts and really start to understand what those little parts are, it becomes so much easier for us to feel like, oh, I could do that. I could hum. I can walk in a way, I could march in a way that my feet are making a rhythm. I can skip with a skipping rope with my children. And we start to really realize how easy music is to access.
Yeah, I like how you've discussed chanting and making mantras that are positive into chants. And
Yeah, chanting is my favorite personal tool. I call it, I do what I call melodic mantra. And that is, I come up with a mantra or whatever it is that I need to hear or believe or embody. And we all know how powerful affirmations are, but when you sing them, it is so much more powerful, because singing, then the brain releases dopamine because it loves singing. The brain is musical. It wants us to sing. And so when we experience dopamine, that is hugely involved with neuroplasticity. So we are far more likely to be motivated to continue to sing it. We're also more likely to have that little tune become earworm, stuck in our head, so to speak, so that we're experiencing it over and over and over inside our head. And we are far more likely to fully embody the words that we are singing. So in the Brain Care Cafe, we have melodic mantras that focus on each pillar. Each month we have a different melodic mantra. And they're always very simple. Anyone can make them up. So one that I've been singing recently, I'll sing it to you if you like, just to show you how simple it is.
Sure.
I am not my parents, nor my sisters or my brothers. I can love and respect them and be me. That's it. That was my affirmation. That's what I really wanted to take on and to embody and to really believe, not just believe it in theory, but really believe it. And so I put it to a simple tune, and it can be any tune. The more simple, the better. So people often get stuck on, they're pretty good at coming up with an affirmation or something that they want to tell themselves. But then they get stuck at the point where they're like, oh, how do I put this to a tune? Can you come up with a tune for me for this? Honestly, the more simple, the better. Even if it was 2 words, I am not my parents or my brothers or my sisters. That is a tune. The simpler, the better. Any melody will do. And if you can't think of one, you can use one from a nursery rhyme. And I sing those over and over and over and over and over. And they have been the most wonderful part of my personal practice. That is my favorite and my thing that I do every day. It's like my version of journaling, I guess, or exercising.
It's long been known that if you can put it to a tune, you can memorize a list or parts that's been woven into television shows as part of the culture. We know that in some higher learning facilities, they use those mnemonic aids of pairing it with a song, make a song out of it. And there's something about how, as you were just talking about, so many different parts of the brain are working in concert like an orchestra to help me pull it together when I use music. It's so much more vibrant than if I just try to remember a list of items or words.
Absolutely. There is no way that 2-year-olds around the world would be able to know 26 random pieces of information in the correct order if it wasn't for the alphabet song.
Exactly.
By rights, we should be using music in all our education. And we should be using music because another thing that happens in the limbic system is long-term memory, and melody, emotion, and long-term memory are like 3 best friends that just do everything together. Which is why when we tell stories and we use emotion in what we're teaching, people understand, people remember the message, which is why I share my information via storytelling a lot. Because I know that emotion and long-term memory go together, as does melody. And we will remember songs. And I've done a lot of work in dementia care with people who can't speak anymore, yet they can sing songs from the wartime word for word, but they can't say their own name. And it's the brain, it's melody and the long-term memory. They're connected.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So as we're wrapping down here, winding down, what haven't we asked you about that you want to make sure we get in on this discussion for our audience?
I just want to encourage people to firstly know that they are musical, and that the idea that they aren't is one that's just come from what they've told themselves or what their parents or teachers might have told them when they were little. When I was a kid in the 80s, there were people who were being told to mime in the choir, and that kind of thing was common. Some people were just told they weren't musical, and so they stopped their piano lessons because, oh, you're not musical. This is all a myth. We are all musical. It is very, very important that we reclaim our musicality, because our brain depends on it. And we are living in a modern, fast-paced, expectation-dense, sensory-dense, Western modern culture that our brain, our body and nervous system was not really designed to be living in. And so we need to do everything we can to support our brain to function at its best. We need to care for our brain, and expressing our musicality is one of the best ways of doing that, because our brain is a musical being. This does not mean you have to go and learn an instrument. This does not mean you have to go and join a choir or work out how to sing in tune, or, this just means that we need to open our voice, open our mouth and hum or whistle or move our body or sway in time to the music that we hear.
Or drum.
Or drum, yes.
Find a way to go sit in on a drum circle where you don't have to be the master of rhythm to participate and or gain the benefits. The idea that if you think you're not musical and you don't have any rhythm, then you're forgetting your heart.
Yes.
And so many of those original cultures used the heart rhythm as the fundamental drum beat, and wonderful.
Yeah. And look, then I would also say, if you're going to start looking at implementing music strategically in your lifestyles, do it as part of your lifestyle, not just, oh, I'm feeling anxious, should listen to some music. Like what you just said, Tim, was a great example of the heartbeat as the pulse. Our body and brain falls in sync with what we listen to very quickly. One of the most dominant relationships, neural pathways in the brain, is between auditory information, that which we hear, and the motor cortex, which is a part of the brain that tells our body how to move. That relationship is very strong, which is why when we listen to fast music while we're driving, we drive too fast. Or why when we go to a hip hop concert, we jump. We don't sway and float. Our brain tells our body to move in sync with what we hear. So if we listen to music that is roughly around 60 to 80 beats per minute, or that of the resting heart rate, we are able to allow our body to stay in a regulated state around, and our heart rate actually falls in sync, and our respiratory rate actually falls in sync with the pulse or the beat of the music that which we're listening to. So we do not need to make it ourselves. Experiencing music involves hearing it or even thinking about it. If we just think about that beat in our head, we are implementing music in our day. And a beautiful thing about music is it can be a very passive activity. So we might be playing music in our home, or we might be singing or humming or whistling at home, and our children or those that are with us are experiencing music just by having us make it in the environment. Whether or not they are actively listening to it does not matter, because if I am whistling in the environment, anyone else in that environment, that my whistling will come to their ear as sensory information and go to their brain to be integrated, and the brain will hear it. Obviously, if someone says, will you stop your singing, that's okay too. We've got to use this in context.
That's good for them. They're using their voice.
Yes.
They're exercising one of the 12 pillars of good brain care.
They are.
Well, so I just had the thought as you were speaking. Have you heard about Alex Doman and Advanced Brain Technologies, or the listening program? Alex Doman wrote a book, Listening or Learning at the Speed of Sound, and he wrote it with a gentleman who was one of the ones who tapped into the Mozart effect of music.
Yes.
And so they're taking this at an automated, integrated, all the kinds of things you're talking about, they're doing lots of science to develop this. And in the listening program, you buy a quality set of stereo headphones, and then you buy a subscription for their service, and then you listen twice a day to, it's about a 15-minute pattern of music. And it does all of this moving from one side to the other and fading just when you think you know where the rhythm is going or the melody is going, and then it fades off and your brain fills it in. It's taking
binaural beats.
Yeah, it's taking full advantage of all of the things you were just saying about how active all the parts of the brain become in listening to or in creating music.
Yeah, there's a lot of amazing stuff going on. We've really learned a lot about the brain in the last 15, 20 years. And because it's only recent, you know, when I did my Master of Music Therapy, I was taught that the brain stopped developing at 25, or that anyone who didn't hear language before they were 8 would never be able to talk. These are the things that were science back then. And that wasn't that long ago. It was less than 20 years ago. So it's no wonder that we are in a time in history right now where people are still entrenched in old paradigms, and it's quite difficult to get this information out and to help people actually shift their behaviors and shift into new frameworks of understanding, because we sort of are the first generation of people in this time to really have that information about the brain and then be able to gently and slowly be shifting into new somatic ways and using our body and using our music and our voice and understanding all of that. So it's brilliant that this information is available. And I hope that in the future that information will be the mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope the same. And I was just put to mind as you were talking about Jill Bolte Taylor. Do you know her and her stroke of genius? She's a neuroscientist
Yes, I do. Yes.
who had her stroke, and she said the science was telling us that if you don't recover this faculty or that faculty from your stroke within 6 months or a year, it's gone. You're not going to get it back. And personally, she's watched brain functioning return 7 and 8 years after the fact. So she knows that what they were teaching as hard science, in fact, is wrong. And there's far more ability for the brain to recover or take over functions from a part that's been damaged than anybody ever knew. And that's why it, as I heard you talking, I'm saying there's far more capacity within every even close to normal brain for healing, for soothing, for self-regulating, for integrating. And your idea of taking the mantra and adding it to music is a wonderful way to start integrating that. And I love your 12 pillars. I'm so grateful that you were willing to share with our audience. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I could talk about this all day, so I'm very happy to be here.
Well, it's been an honor, and I look forward to following your work. I'm subscribed to your newsletter, and check into, it's AlysonDavies.com.au is the website, and we'll have links to that in the blog. And I look forward to our next chance to talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.